Hello, I'm Anawultus, and welcome to, I guess, what will be the first development log for a tabletop game that I am designing along with my good friend Murad. And it is, well, we don't actually have a title for it yet, so the name of a folder related to it that's on my computer is called Mecha Space Fantasy, and that's just because I gave a pitch as to what kind of game we should make, and what he told me is he just liked all the ideas I threw at him, so we ended up jumping into a whole bunch of different genres. So it's a bit science fiction, it's a bit fantasy, it's got big mechs in it, and you know what? I'm kind of hyped for it. So anyway, I've probably been doing most of the work on the project, but that I don't mind. It was my idea in the first place to do this, so I might as well do a lot of the legwork here. But anyway, I'm going to today examine a bit of the little fight or the skirmish that we had with a very early version of a rule set. So early that it's not even written down. I essentially just had to make them up the day before, because when I told him, I told him that I had how the movement was going to work. I had an idea of how that was going to work and how the aiming system would work and the accuracy. He told me that he wanted to test it the very next day. So we did it on a live stream on the Anawultus and Murad podcast. I think it's episode 12 that it happened, and it ended up going a bit badly because he had told me that he was going to have a map ready, and he didn't have a map ready, so we had to do it in our heads. And because we didn't actually have a map to use, it meant that we couldn't really use rulers, which is what normally you should use when playing a game such as this. So without rulers, we ended up having to use some trigonometry to figure out the distances that we were moving at in order to triangulate the positions. But anyway, today I'm going to look at the first couple moves that were made in this game. So the first move was, okay, let me just look at this paint here. So I'm going to select red for the moves, and the first move, I'm just going to make a couple of circles here. Perhaps I should put one over here, that's where I am, and this is where he is, and I'll also make a little directional pointer to indicate the direction that we're moving at. So we started out 60 units of distance apart, very nondescript units facing each other, and the first move, I should maybe get a smaller size here, the first move that was made was, let me use orange here, it was moving a tiny bit. Well, maybe I should get a larger size again. Okay, well, just bouncing around here. It was moving forward a bit, and then Murad stopped at a velocity of 2, and was still facing me. And I guess maybe I'll just use the pencil feature, and we'll use a thick brush. And so he was moving at a speed of 2 in this direction, and he had moved a total of 3 units of distance, just speeding up and stopping there, which stopped 57 units of distance short from me. And at this point, he hadn't really fully used the 15 movement points that he had. He had only used 5 of them, but he decided to stop his turn there. And he was also out of weapon range. The optimum range was 30 units of distance, and -1 for each point further. So at this range, he would not be able to hit me at all. So I'm actually going to show you the math here, okay, on how this is supposed to work. So since I don't have a ruler device. Well, I do have little ruler edges, but I'm not going to use those. I'm actually going to show you essentially what we had to do in our heads as this was going on. So here is my spreadsheet. We were doing this in our heads, and I was using a website to do some of the trigonometry calculations because I couldn't be bothered of doing sines and cosines in my head. That's just a bit annoying to do, not gonna lie. So here we go. So we're going to enter in our starting positions. So I'm going to place myself at a position of x negative 30, a y 0, and he's going to have a starting position of 30. So essentially what I'm saying here is that the way this works, the yellow, I'm going to explain the spreadsheet to everyone. The yellow is input areas. The green is the output for information. So what you do is you start out by putting in your starting position in the top. So I'm just going to put a 0 just so everyone knows it's a 0. I don't have to, but I'm going to do it just because it looks clean when I do it that way. And what that does is it shows everyone the exact location that you start at. And the way this works is it tracks your location each turn and also keeps track of the distance, the direct distance between the mechs. So we started out 60 apart, and I'm going to say that he moved first, and his change in movement was a -3, and then we ended up 57 apart. So the equations involved here are very simple. This here is the absolute value distance. So these two squares add up well, okay, let me be more exact. These two columns here add up, the columns here, okay, sum column G. So this mech A position X coordinate adds up the coordinates, the starting coordinates, and all the changes throughout the entire game to get to the exact position of the X coordinate of mech A. Same thing with the Y, and same thing with mech B X and mech B Y. And in the meantime, once those are established, I then, reference A and D, the mech positions on the X coordinate of both mechs, and I subtract them from each other, same thing with the Y, in order to get the distance between them. I then turn that into an absolute value. There's probably simpler ways of doing it, but I did this in an afternoon, and I don't really do a lot of equations in spreadsheets. So then I follow that up by using the absolute value distances and the distance between the mechs in order to calculate the angles in a right triangle. The right triangle, of course, being based on the X and Y distances, as well as the distance between the mechs as the hypotenuse. So we're always going to get a right triangle, and that measures the arc cosine between these in order to get the other two angles of a triangle. So when we're standing in a straight line on the that is the same on the Y coordinate, what we get is an angle of 90 here and an angle of 0. And since the third angle is always 90, we know it's 180 degrees, which means that it's a flat line. But that's not too important here. But anyway, and I'm going to address the direct movement function here. But anyway, as you see, he moved, and that changed his position. So then what I did on my turn, okay, I'm going to now switch over the Windows capture to the paint again. What I did on my turn is, okay, let me just get onto paint. Okay, so I began to move forward, and I moved forward a lot. I sped up to a speed of 3, I moved as much as I could, and then I used my momentum to slow me down so that I was just inside of range. So I'll put my mech here, and no speed on my mech. And then I'm just going to do a short one. I fired, and I hit for 1/5 of the health, which is an exact shot. So because I got just within 30, so I moved a total of 27 units because we were 57 units apart. So I'm going to now show you what that looks like on the spreadsheet. And so I'm going to say that it's a positive movement of 27 on the x coordinate. I don't have to do a more complex calculation because I know what it is. So there you go. Now we're 30 apart. Optimum range for the weapon. I fired and I hit, and then he was panicking a little bit. Well, maybe not panicking. I wouldn't say he was panicking. He realized that he was in optimum range. So on his third turn, okay, and now things are going to get complicated. So let me just switch things over back to the paint again. On his third turn, I'm going to use yellow here. He immediately fired back, and I managed to dodge the attack, if I remember correctly. Well, he had good accuracy, but I rolled well on a react, so I dodged it. So then he turned and moved diagonally away from me. Let me just perhaps use a thicker line to represent that, so people can see better. So he moved diagonally away, going to say there, and he's facing that direction. So he's actually got his back turned, which is not a good idea. And he, let's see, and that's it really. He initially intended to go on a right angle, but I told him that it would take more movement points to do that. So the movement points was he slowed down to 0, so that's a -2, and then he turned, that's a -3, accelerated to a speed of 2, that's another -5, so now he's down 8, and he used the rest, which is 7, to move at a speed of 2, so that's 14. And then that gives me 15, 17, and 18 in that direction. So this is where it starts getting complicated, because at this point, until now, we had just moved on an axis, which meant that the movement was relatively easy to track. But at this point, since we were not moving on an axis anymore, it actually became extremely difficult for me to track the movement. So, in my head anyway. I knew the general direction he had gone and the movement overall, but actually calculating the trigonometry was going to get difficult unless I wanted to follow exactly in his footsteps, which I did not want to do. I wanted to make a more direct movement towards his position. So, now let's calculate his exact movement. So, the direction he moved, he moved a distance of 18. So we plug in the distance, and then the angle he moved at was at a 45-degree angle because he went diagonally. And that gives us a distance of 12.7279 and 12.7279 on the x and the y coordinates. And it's going to be the same because it's an exact diagonal movement. And because it is in a positive direction, it means that it allows me to calculate it positively. But anyway, let me explain to you how the movement functions work. So you calculate the distance that you moved, as well as the angle that you moved at. And the exact function for the angle, I designed it so that the movement would be at a 0 to 90 degree angle. In other words, in order to fully calculate it, you need to think about which sector you're moving into, because of course you've got the direct x and y directions where you're moving at 90 degrees, but anything in between, you've got 90-degree sectors, and you need to calculate yourself which sector you're moving into. So he's moving up and to the right, so that is a positive on both counts. So now I am going to enter in on mech B movement. I'm going to put 12.728. Now it doesn't have to be fully exact, because if you actually had a ruler, it wouldn't be fully exact. 12.728. And there you go. So now the distance between us is about 44.58. So that's actually quite the distance, and is too long for me to use my weapons, which is what he wanted. So, okay, I just realized I may not have had that on camera. That's fine. I'll just show you all. And let me just go into how the movement function works. So you enter in the distance and the angle is converted to radians because these spreadsheets like to use radians rather than angles. And then we do the cosine and the sine of the radian, and then that is transferred over and multiplied by the A9, by the distance, which would be the hypotenuse in our hypothetical right triangle. Because this is a adjacent and opposite side calculation for an SSS triangle, just so that you know what's actually happening here. Or to be more exact, it's an SSA. Well, no, it's an AAS. We've got two angles. The other angle is assumed to be 90 degrees, and so 18, the distance is always going to be the hypotenuse of the triangle, just so everyone knows. And then we take the cosine here and sine here, multiply them by the distance, and we've got our movement, which then we transfer over onto this part of the spreadsheet to indicate the movement that we made. So now we have a new triangle where the distance is 14.58 between the mechs, and the x distance is 42.7, but the y distance is 12.728. So already, if you were looking on the paint, it's not quite as accurate. It would be a lot steeper because he moved a bit farther. But anyway, so what I did, and I don't exactly remember the exact distance I moved. I think I tried to move as much as possible. I think I sped up 2, then slid, then turned. So I'll just quickly show that on here. I sped up and then I allowed my momentum to slow me down, and then I turned and followed in this direction so that I could then get a shot in the back. And since I'm moving at the same speed in the same direction as he was, it also allowed me to get a shot without any penalty on it, which is a good thing, if you ask me, because it means that I got a good shot. But unfortunately for me, on the reaction, despite only being able to react on a 6 out of 6, having a 1 in 6 chance of reacting, he did react, and he managed to receive half damage. So, by the way, if you may have seen the live stream, I did a diagram of this situation on the live stream, and it's flipped, and that's because in my mind at this point I had flipped the directions we were moving. It wasn't that important since I flipped it on an axis, so it was just a reflection of a direction we were moving, so it didn't actually change anything. But let me show you how this would work now. So, I realized that he was in front of me, so now I needed to move in his direction. So I moved in his direction for a distance, and if I'm going to exactly measure this distance, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to subtract 5 for movement points in the final direction. So we've got 10 left. I'm going to say 5 for speeding up, and another 5 for maintaining velocity. So we've got, and then I'm going to assume that I slid down. I could watch the live stream back, but it might be too much time for me. I'm just going to show you a spreadsheet here. So that means that, by the way, I'm moving directly towards him, which is why it's important for me to have these angles here. So angle in this equation is going to be 16.5879. And how do I know that that is going to be the angle? The reason I know that that's going to be the angle is because I see that the x distance is the larger distance, which indicates to me that it's the one more in line with what the hypotenuse indicates. Therefore, I am primarily looking at an angle that closes the x distance rather than the y distance. So we're going to get 16, and I'm going to put 0.58 8. Why not? Simplify it. If we were using a real protractor, we wouldn't get to the exact angle anyway. So then the distance moved, so it's 3 for speeding up, another 2 when I slow down, and another 10. So I move a total of 15 actually. So 3, 2, 15. So I'm going to say that I moved a distance of 15, and that means that my x movement is going to be 14.3757. I'm playing fast and loose with significant digits here. I hope it doesn't bother you. 4.28231 on the y movement. And I'm not done yet. Now I turn in order to reach his exact angle. So now remember, when you're inserting the angle here, it's not how much you turn, it's how much the angle is relative to the x and y axis. In other words, it's always relative to the axis, so always think of it in terms of the coordinates. So I turn 45 degrees to an angle of 45 degrees, and I do a distance of 3 because I'm speeding up, and that gives me another 2.1 2.12 and 2.12. And that means that now we are very close on Y. The X distance is 26 point, well, the total distance is 26.984, and my angle is at 76 degrees, which is enough for me to hit him with my in the back. But anyway, that's the direction I moved, and I matched velocity, but he still managed to take half damage. Lucky him. And as you can see, it's actually relatively easy once you know what you're putting in to get the answers you want and to get a relatively accurate game going this way. Now, ideally, you would actually use a ruler to do this, so that with a real map, use a real ruler and a real protractor, so that you wouldn't have to calculate the angles. You wouldn't have to, well, the angles, you wouldn't even have to calculate them. All you'd have to see is, are you facing one of the 8 directions? Which of the 8 directions are you primarily moving in? And that's going to determine which direction your movement points get put into. But other than that, there's really no other assumption here. So anyway, I'm just going to give you another quick recap of what happened next, just so that everyone knows, because this is a bit of a review of the fight. So then what happens is, I'm going to go green here, and I'm going to increase size again. He decides that he wants to stop, okay? And he wants to turn so that he can face me off directly, and from there fire into me, and he hits, and then he turns and goes, I think it's this direction, because he's still going diagonally away from me. So let me do that again. Goes in this direction. So now he's moving away from me, and what I intended to do at this point is that I wanted to fire immediately on his position, since I only had 1 penalty on my shot. But that's where we ended the game. But anyway, what I learned from the fight, though, is not only the exact maths that we would have to do if we were to make a computer game, because it's a bit more difficult to do these things in a computer game, so you need a bit more mathematical mind for it. Let me just add some speed lines here. I also learned that the exact... I liked the movement system. I think it worked relatively well, and it served its purpose. And his his final speed was 1, which is... There we go. I like the movement system. I think it served its purpose well, and I think that overall, it is, in my opinion, it does require a lot of tweaking and a lot of balancing, especially once we bring in different types of mechs. We're going to have to really see which mechs we want to be faster and how that's really going to work as the game progresses. So my opinion is that all mechs should have an equal number of movement points, but some mechs will have a higher top speed, and that will determine a number of things. That's my opinion on how the movement speed should be done. But anyway, I also think that the actual calculation on the damage was pretty good. Not the calculation, but the rolls we did. I think that was actually very good. I'm not entirely sure about the balancing of the weapons, since I need to add all potential weapons onto the mechs to see what would happen if let's say, if you had 15 weapons firing all at once. Well, they wouldn't all fire at once because they're not all the same kinds of weapons, in the sense that some of the chest weapon slots would almost never actually have firing weapons in them. But let's say you filled 8 of the chest slots with weapons, you had a big crossbow holding, and the crossbow on each shoulder, and maybe a little, I don't know, trebuchet on the back firing. Would see what would happen if all that fired at the same time. That would be, I think, interesting to calculate whether or not the balancing would be fair at that point. But so far, I would have to say that things did progress very well, in my opinion. And I think the spreadsheet that I made, although it's not necessarily let me just delete all my inputs here. Although it's not necessarily the best, I would say it serves its purpose. And if we have to do more tests before we have any actual way of measuring distance in a more everyday way, in a more way that in a way that would be more accurate to the game, to how the game is actually going to be played, then it would be nice. And you may ask, why am I using momentum and the directional system and all of that? What's the deal with momentum? Well, the idea with momentum is that I designed it specifically so that we would be able to eventually make a subversion of this game that has space mechs. Because if you're in space, then there's going to be a sort of lack of things slowing you down in microgravity, especially in low density microgravity, the interplanetary medium, a very common battle zone, I would say is generally relatively thin, which means that there's not much to slow you down, which means if you speed up, you're going to fly a lot, and you're going to fly very fast. And I want to calculate, I want to not be as realistic as possible, because obviously if you look at the premises that we're dealing with here, it's not going to be as realistic as possible. But I want to at least have it be believable. And going to a stage where mechs have movement, and because of their large mass, they might need time or energy to slow down. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And because in real life, if you've got a car that's moving at a high velocity, you can't just hit the brakes and you're stopped. What's going to happen is you can hit the brakes and you'll really whiplash yourself as you're really slowing down, and it's really, and the inertia of both the vehicle and everything inside of it is really pulling the weight of the car forward, while the brakes are offering a mechanical resistance with the road, which in some cases, if the pushing forward is so much stronger than the resistance from the road, then you get into a very bad situation. Or if you hit an object, if you're getting a car crash, of course things keep moving, and objects pull really hard. If you're holding, let's say you're in a car, you're holding a baby, and you're getting a car crash. How much pull is that baby going to have in your arms when you suddenly slow down from, let's say, 70 kilometers per hour to 0? How much pull is that going to have in your arms? It's going to have a lot of pull. It's going to be pretty hard to hold on to that baby. That baby's going to fly, and it's not going to be a very happy experience for anyone involved. Well, I certainly hope no one would be happy in such an event. But anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that there's a lot of stuff going on here, and I think that having a little bit of realism, just a little bit, really helps everything else. It's like Mary Poppins always said, a little bit of sugar helps the medicine go down. So with that note, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and hopefully this has been a useful look into what we've been doing with our little project here, the Mecha Space Fantasy. I hope people are getting hyped. If you would like to be part of a project, then I'd be happy for you to join. There may even be a little bit of money involved. Not yet. Currently, it's all it's all. I would say we're all doing this casually. We're all doing this free. We're not getting paid for doing any of this. But if you're on the project team and we finally decide to put out the rule book, or perhaps even a video game, then let me just say you might be able to get a little piece of the action. So that's what I'm saying. If you want to be on the project, ask to be on the project. Any skills that you can bring to the table, maybe you're very good at doing art, having some good artwork would be good, some concept art, maybe you have experience in making tabletop games, that would be good as well. Maybe you just want to playtest, probably not as much money in that, but it would be helpful as well. But we're not ready for playtests yet. We've got a lot of work to do before we get to that stage. We're currently in, if this were a computer program, the pre-alpha stage. So it's all very open. We've not got anything in the works. Well, we've got things in the works, but we've not got anything fully worked out yet. So although the game that we did play the other day, if there's any proof of concept, I would say that is a proof of concept that it is indeed possible to play, even though in the current condition that we have things where we don't even have a map, and we can't measure distance on a map using a ruler. That makes it very difficult. Because here's a little tip for all of you people going to school. This is a very bad tip, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. There may be a way, okay, if you look at, let's say you've got a triangle on a test, and someone asks you, solve this triangle. You may use your calculator or do it in your head, as I would probably do. But the reason I didn't do it is because I didn't really want to do trig just out of the blue on a Saturday morning. It wasn't really what I was up to. But anyway, you could instead take a ruler, take a protractor, just measure the sides. If the sides don't add up to the units that are in the information that you've been given, then what you do is you simply do a little ratio and you figure it out. But it's actually not going to work. Why? Why is it not going to work? How could they possibly draw a triangle on a test and not actually make it proportional to what the question asks? Well, that's because they don't try hard enough. That's why. They're not tryhards like I am. and that's why it doesn't work. But anyway, a little side there. So thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'm always keen for feedback, and I'll be seeing you all next time on Awiltus. Over and out.